Anyone can sell, anyone can say they're the best, but not everyone can show, like you can, the reviews. Do you feel like it's getting harder to maintain those reviews and OTAs are being more difficult and strict?
It's really easy when you're running 5 vacation rentals and you've got pretty good control over the guest experience and the owners. When you get into 100, maybe 1% of guests are a headache. You get up to 500 properties, now you got a bunch of headache guests every single day. It's extremely difficult at scale to maintain a certain review.
You have to survive, and there's this constant challenge of overhiring versus underhiring, that balance that needs to be played with to make sure that you're ready for that growth without breaking the bank today.
The key is staying one step ahead of the scale instead of being reactive to what's happening.
At which point things started to break and you needed to take a different look at how you were doing things if you wanted to keep maintaining those same quality standards.
You're always having competing priorities where owners want one thing and guests want the other thing. It's very difficult business to keep quality and scale at the same time.
Homeowner acquisition, you said that the biggest tool has been the reviews. That kind of sells itself. But as far as actually getting those leads, what's been your number one source of new homeowners?
I'd say our number one source was...
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality. And really, we invite here entrepreneurs, operators, investors, founders, and leaders in this space so they can tell us about their stories and the lessons that they have learned along the way, maybe even some of the mistakes that they have made along the way, so we don't have to make those same mistakes ourselves. And today, I'm super excited to have here Steven Chrobak, the owner and founder at Myrtle Beach Destinations, with us. Very, very excited to have you on, Steven. Why don't you tell us briefly where you're taking the call from and a little bit about what you do for a living these days at a high level before we get into the back end story?
Yeah, sure, man. I appreciate you having me on. Certainly excited to talk about real estate and all things hospitality. As you mentioned, I own and operate Myrtle Beach Destinations. If you couldn't guess, we're a vacation rental management company based out of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So we manage properties all the way up to North Myrtle Beach and then all the way down into the Murrells Inlet area. So about, 20, 30 miles stretch of the coast there. I'm taking a call out of High Point, North Carolina. So I actually don't live, nor have I ever lived in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I live about 2.5 to 3.5 hours away at any given time. And so I started the company about going on a little less than 2 years ago now, and we've grown pretty rapidly. We're at about 110, give or take, units under management. And it's been a fun ride thus far anyway.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I remember the first time we spoke, you were pretty much in the process of setting up the documentation, the contracts, like all the logistics, and you were talking about, hey, I wanna scale this, and then just seeing how fast you've been able to achieve that is impressive. What would you attribute your success to in terms of the speed at which you've been able to scale? Like, what do you think you're doing differently there that has allowed you to scale so fast?
Yeah, it's funny. I do remember speaking with you. You were like one of the first people that I spoke with when I kind of had the idea of it, and we talked for a while, kind of about the what the plans were anyway. And it's one thing to think about it, so it's kind of cool to come full circle anyway, almost 2 years later now. But yeah, there's probably a handful of different things that I could point to. For me, I've owned it all started with me owning my own Airbnb, so I really just kind of understood the wants and the needs of investors and owners. And I had what I would consider pretty good success, especially for our market, which I could talk forever. Our market's it's got a lot of its own nuances, but I understood what owners wanted, and I kind of pitched that to a lot of my neighbors, and that's kind of how we got our foot in the door of the management side. And then
Mhm.
really it just took off from there with you know being able to manage in a few other different complexes and just really focusing on our good reviews. And if I had to say like one thing that has gotten us to this point, it's just been hyper focusing on guest experience. And, our Airbnb profile, I think we're at 4.89 or 4.9 over 2,000 reviews at this point. And so the easiest way for me to build trust and get an owner to sign up with us is I just send them our Airbnb profile and I kind of say, hey, like if you can find someone better ranked than us in our area, I say you go with them. But you know, the reviews, the proof is in the pudding, so you know exactly how we're treating your guests. And generally, if you're treating the guests right, that's really all the owners want, and the rest of the pieces of the puzzle kind of fall into place when it comes to revenue and that type of thing.
And that's a conversation we were having off camera as well. In terms of like, I was asking you, would you consider yourself to be more focused on the owner side or on the guest side? Of course, we're focused on both. But one thing you mentioned, which is interesting, and you just alluded to it, is that a happy guest is a happy owner, right? So that mindset of letting the reviews do the selling on the owner side, I think it's crucial, but it's not easy to maintain, especially when you're growing fast and adding more properties. What were sort of the stages of growth that you saw, at which point maybe things started to break and you needed to take a different look at how you were doing things if you wanted to keep maintaining those same quality standards?
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's very difficult business to keep quality and scale at the same time. And then it's also very difficult, to your point of like you're always having almost competing priorities where owners want one thing and guests want the other thing. So like the guests want their, something fixed within seconds, and the owner wants to be made aware and they want to save $10 on a certain vendor. And so then they get upset if you send someone that's $65 instead of $75, where the guest
Hmm.
just wants it fixed now. So it's always very difficult, competing priorities. And we could probably talk for a while about that and kind of how to skin that cat. But, for us, I could say there's always certain scales. And what I've tried to do up front is put the money, like, look where I want to be in 6 months and establish the processes and procedures with, maybe way less units than what we need those processes for, if that makes sense. So, like, even when we only had 10 or 20 units, we were putting processes in place and people in place that way when we hit the 50 or the 70 unit mark, it should flow relatively smoothly. And it's difficult to stay profitable doing that, um, especially as a new business. So if you're a founder, you're gonna have to do a lot of stuff yourself, especially in those early days. But
Hmm.
I would say our key to success has just been investing up front in where we want the company to be. So even now, as we're at 110 units, I'm looking it to March of this year, hoping to be at around 150 to 170 is kind of our goal. And we're
Hmm.
hiring this off season, assuming that we're going to be at 150, 170, even at 200 properties during next peak season. And that's kind of what has been, that's really the key, in my opinion, that has set us up for success to keep our reviews high, is staying one step ahead of the scale instead of being reactive to what's happening.
Hmm. And you mentioned something there which is crucial, which is that it's not necessarily easy to be profitable when you're putting in place an infrastructure for the future you, right? For the size of a portfolio you'll have in 6 months. So how have you managed to navigate that, as far as like being ready for the growth that's coming ahead, without killing your operation today, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to kind of survive, and there's this constant challenge of like over hiring versus under hiring, like that's that balance that needs to be played with, to make sure that, to your point, you're ready for that growth without breaking the bank today. So how have you navigated that?
Yeah, I think for any, especially smaller operator, like, you're going to be wearing multiple different hats. And so that's the first thing that I would do, is just know that you're going to have to kind of put in the elbow grease and the hustle, if you will, up front, and that's really where your costs are going to be saved in order to take a salary, remain profitable, make payroll, all that fun stuff. So really, and it's all dependent on the size of the units you manage too. If you've got houses that are 6 bedroom versus 1 bedroom condos, obviously the numbers are gonna pencil out very differently. But that's how I would say it worked for us up front. Is step one is just me knowing that, hey, maybe I'm gonna be the one answering phone calls late at night for the first however many months or years or whatever it may be. And that's where we're gonna save costs, is me doing the general labor while also kind of running the business. Fortunately for me, we had uh, reserves and stuff like that in place. So I intentionally just said, hey, I'm going to take a large chunk of money up front and put these investments in place, knowing that in 2 to 3 years that these are going to pay dividends. And so that's kind of what we did, is just, the first probably 50 or so units, I did a lot of the hands-on day-to-day myself. And then right around the 50 to 60 unit mark, I brought on a formal general manager to kind of take over the day-to-day, run the operation, and kind of let him do his thing. And he's still doing it, currently. And it's been a much needed hire for us, especially moving into the previous peak season. But, I kind of did that moving into the 50 property mark, knowing that, hey, we're probably going to be at 80 to 100 over the course of the summer. We're really going to need a strong operations team in place. So this is kind of our time to step back. So the long answer to your question was that. And then the short answer is, be prepared to roll up your sleeves and do a lot of the work yourselves to cut costs. And you really just got to remain, very cognizant of what you're spending money on, and know that a lot of the investments that you're making now, they may not show up for another year or two.
Hmm. Yeah, no, interesting. And by the way, you have an interesting background. Like you were in the military, in the Air Force. Thank you for your service, by the way. What do you think that background uh, gives you? As far as you were talking, the willingness to roll up your sleeves and get the work done, and like what do you think that background gives you that perhaps has helped in being able to be, I don't know, maybe disciplined, structured, consistent. I mean, there's so many things that you think of when you think of the military as far as skills that you develop. What do you think those most important skills have been for you that you've been able to apply in the building of your operation?
Yeah, I'd say the biggest thing for me, and I was in operations for 8 years, and, a lot of my team I brought over with 0 vacation rental experience, and they had operation experience in the military. I think if you're good at running operations in the military, then it's gonna naturally transition over to the vacation rentals. And I'd say, obviously there's a lot of the core stuff that you mentioned of just the discipline and structure and that type of thing. But I can tell you when I was doing operations, we were running teams of 20 plus people for 24/7, 365. We didn't have holidays, we didn't have, even, there were times we're working 14-day shifts on and off, that type of thing. So it's just, very similar to the vacation rental management industry, where there's just, you know, no such thing as holidays, really, right? Like a guest could
Hmm.
call you any time of night, any day, and that type of thing. So it really kind of it set a good background for understanding A, how an operation worked, B, how to run a team, and then, C, just the willingness to do what it took to make sure that, mission success or whatever you want to call it, that things are happening as they should. And I think the biggest thing we're used to, you cut out there for a second, but I'd say the biggest thing was just being able and willing to do whatever it took, and that's why I kind of intentionally early on have hired military guys up to this point, knowing that even though they don't have industry experience, that they do have that willingness to do what it takes and just kind of roll their sleeves up and figure it out. And it's been, it's kept us very successful in my opinion up to this point. I've been, I honestly I plan to continue to do that. Quick shameless plug, really it's not a plug for me, but for anyone looking for military talent, there's a handful of programs, Skill Bridge, Hiring Our Heroes, and there's a few others which I'm sure I can look up links that you can post here. But essentially what it does is if an active duty guy is transitioning out of the military, they can get it approved by their commander to have up to 6 months of essentially an internship, but they're getting their military pay and benefits. So, for example, I can essentially employ a military guy for up to 6 months pending his commander approval. He will be a full time employee for us, and he'll continue to get his military pay and military benefits. So, he gets real world experience from us. We get a full time employee, and it's just really a way that it was a um, congressional program to get essentially helping veterans transition into the civilian sector. So
Wow.
if it's someone in the industry, I highly recommend. It's free to sign up. You got to do just some approvals to show like here's the training plan and here's how I'm going to help. But really good way to give some military guys an experience. Very good pipeline to find talent, and also it just helps military guys as they're transitioning into the real world.
That's super interesting, and thanks for sharing those resources. I think everyone, or anyone, can benefit from it for sure, especially in a business that's so talent heavy, and we at the end of the day require that human capital for pretty much everything in this business. Now, I'm curious to know, continuing on this topic about your background in the military and having a lot of people in your team that also have a similar background, what elements of the way you run your teams, maybe you have put in place that are similar or inspired by the way in which things are done, perhaps in the military? Because I'm always intrigued by all this leadership, uh, you know, sort of best practices and just frameworks that come from people that have been in the military. So I'm curious to know if there's anything on your end that you have put in place around that.
Yeah, there's a handful of things. The biggest thing that I've always been has just been like anti-corporate America, if that makes
Mhm,
sense. So like I just, I treat it as for lack of a better term, the big boy, big girl program, right? So it's like I do not micromanage. We don't work out of an office. I don't have a time clock. Like as long as people are executing, kind of doing what they need to do, I give a lot of empowerment and kind of let our dudes do their thing for what they think is appropriate on a daily basis. And so
mhm,
I think that's worked well for us. Is just not, being sure you're not micromanaging, just kind of setting the vision and making sure that everyone's, goals are aligned and they understand what we're getting at. For us, it's been hyper focusing on guest experience. Like we know that if there's an issue with the guest, then we're like that becomes our primary focus, just to figure out what we need to do to make the guest happy. And I don't need to get involved and say, let's do this, this, and this. It's like everyone knows that that's the priority. So they're handling it, internally on, whoever's on that ship that day or whatever it may be like that, just aligning values has kind of been a key to make sure everyone's or the business as a whole has been successful.
mhm. And it's interesting because you might think, okay, well, you know, maybe you're going to be more of a disciplinarian and perhaps even micromanager because you're strict, right? Maybe you have this very thorough sort of checklist process, as maybe it might happen in the military or not. I don't know. I just go based on movies and books I read. But whereas in your case, you're saying, no, I'm setting the vision, and I'm letting the team, I'm trusting that the team is going to do the best that is in their ability. And I think that it comes down to setting those priorities. Like if everyone knows that the priority is the guest experience, then how they go about solving the issue is not something you have to be involved in, because you've been clear on the priority, the mission, the outcome you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. We're organized where we need to be, and that's more of our non-military people. I feel like we need to do that for it, and it's just a different type of employee based on like what I'm talking about too. Is like our inspectors are definitely going to need like checklists and very organized procedures, whereas our managers are more of like the big picture and just kind of giving them space to execute. I think the most important thing for us up to this point has just been hiring based on character and how I know the people are going to work on a daily basis. Like as I said, for a couple of the guys, I knew that they had literally no experience in the industry, but I knew that they could figure it out. And it's not a very complicated business. Like it's very hands
Mhm.
on and there's a lot that happens, but it's nothing too complicated. So I sacrificed any sort of industry experience for guys that I knew I could trust to, execute on a daily basis. And I think that's been, in my opinion, our key to success up to this point is just guys that are, you know, high quality, very good, strong backgrounds, and I can trust them to go do what they need to do.
Mhm. Now let's talk, Stephen, about homeowner acquisition, because you said that the biggest tool has been, of course, the reviews that kind of sells itself. But as far as like actually, getting those leads, so what has worked for you? What's been your number one source of new homeowners that have come into your program?
Yeah, I'd say our number one source in general would be our word of mouth referrals, right? So that's a pretty big scope though. So when I say word of mouth, we've got realtor referral programs, cleaner referral programs, homeowner referral programs, cleaner referral programs. So, like, you really want people who are in the industry just to be talking about you and sending people your way. that's been pretty successful for us.
Hmm.
Um, there's different ways to structure that, and we can talk about that now. But essentially, like whether it be monetary incentives or maybe lead incentives for realtors, the way we do it for our cleaners is if they bring us the lead, then they're getting to clean the property, so then they get the recurring revenue for however long they're in the program. But I think word of mouth has been super powerful. But really important for that is kind of like since day one, I've always wanted to, as an owner myself, of someone who had looked for a management company in our area and was unable to find what I thought the industry should be. From day one, it was just really building a company that our owners are going to be so happy with how we treat their property and their guests that they're going to want to tell their neighbors about us. Right. So once you get that positive word of mouth, that's the quickest way that we took off. I can tell you that there's probably 50 Facebook groups for Myrtle Beach, each of which has anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000 people in it. And almost daily, there's owners posting, "Hey, who's the best property management company in Myrtle Beach? Who have you enjoyed?" And like clockwork, I would say anywhere from 3 to 5 of our owners will hop on that post, link to our company, and tag us in it and say, "Hey, we've had great experience with them." And so once you get that, like I don't think you can put a real value on how many people see that. And now we're in the back of their head as someone that's been referred. And it hits different for owners when it's someone that has nothing to gain that's using their services, right? Like, if I'm an owner and I have no skin in the game, like these guys are great, I'm gonna trust that recommendation versus me trying to explain to an owner who's asking for a company like, "Hey, you should use us. We're the best company." It's like, yeah,
Hmm.
okay. That's what the other guy told me too. But when 3 to 5 owners are posting the same thing, like it's really tough to ignore that social evidence.
Hmm. And I repeat this a lot in the show, but I find that it's important, and it goes to what you're saying, which is you only sell because you don't know how to market, and you only market because you don't know how to do product or service.
That's
Which
really good. It honestly, that is like that should be repeated many times. I'm glad that's your catchphrase.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think I've heard something
Yeah,
similar
it doesn't
before,
come
but
from me. It doesn't come from me. It comes
yeah, yeah, yeah.
from some guy online that I listen to. But it's true though. Like if you do a good job at service, at product, at quality, like the reality is that people should talk about it, right? They should be so impressed. And like you said, that's been part of your vision. Like have them be so impressed that they want to tell their friends about it. So it is the hard part, right? Because anyone can sell, anyone can say they're the best, but not everyone can show, like you can, the reviews on the back end that prove that that's the case. By the way, on that note about reviews, do you feel like it's getting harder to maintain those, reviews, and guests are perhaps being more challenging than before, and OTAs are being more, difficult and strict as well? Like what's your take on whether it's 100% something that you can control by having a good operation versus something that's becoming more like kind of like a luck scenario where you might just get unlucky with certain guests?
Yeah, dude, it's such a I feel like you could also talk about this for hours too, because I feel like that's something that I didn't fully appreciate when I was starting the company is like, it's really easy when you're running 5 vacation rentals and you've got a really, you've got pretty good control over the guest experience and the owners, you've got a good relationship. When you get into 100, and I always say, like only really like maybe like 1% of guests are a headache, right? When you have 100 properties, that means that on any given day, one of your guests is a headache. So that means
Mhm.
like 100% of the time, it just gets worse with scale, right? You get up to 500 properties, now you got a bunch of headache guests every single day. And so really I would argue it's not impossible, but extremely difficult at scale to maintain a certain review. And I've done the math on this. I don't remember off the top of my head, but if you think of like even just keeping a 4.9 on Airbnb, you need like 25-star reviews to cancel out one 4-star review to keep that. I mean, think about how easy it is to get a 4-star review. And a lot of times these 4 stars are completely out of your control. And most guests perceive a 4-star as a good thing, right? And
Right.
so,
That's the other crazy thing. I've seen that before where it's like best day ever. Loved it.
yeah,
4 stars. You're like,
yeah.
oh.
Yeah, dude, and we're dealing with that daily. Even just yesterday, we got like 3 4-star reviews come in out of nowhere, and they were all super positive. Like, great stay, would 100% come back. And what do you do with that? You can respond and say thanks. And at a certain point, you just kind of have to accept 4-star reviews are not that big a deal. Certainly, 3 stars is kind of when anything internal in our team. That's when we kind of need to pay attention, figure out what the issue was, reach out to the guests. But 100% to answer your question, at scale, it becomes exponentially more difficult to keep it. The way we're solving that problem is still hyper focusing on guest experience. There's still no downside to that, right? Like, understood, those reviews are just going to be part of the industry that happens in any business. Um, so continue to hyper focus and just make sure they have a good time, and then also being really selective of which properties you take on. I think that there were a few properties that kind of came into our program when we were in what I would consider take on whatever and figure it out mode.
Hmm.
And some of those properties were from owners who haven't updated their units since 1982. To include the couch, some old school hotel couch that hasn't been touched since the 80s. Really tough to keep 5-star reviews, and um, you know, that is a big problem. And so I can tell you that hyper focusing and just kind of like for us, we kind of focus on higher end units, condos, houses in general. And so we're actively turning away. Even today alone, we've turned away 3 new units that reached out to us just because they weren't a good fit for our program. And so I think that if you just hyper focus on guest experience and make sure you're taking the right units and owners into the program, I think that you're going to be able to at least maintain generally pretty good reviews overall, knowing that there's no way to avoid, the occasional 1 to 4 stars that are going to come in just because, there was construction down the road and the guest wasn't a fan of it.
Hmm. Do you feel like you've been able to um, switch over the mindset of certain owners through education and just explaining them what this industry is all about, or do you feel like it's kind of something where you either are the type of owner that's going to be open to hearing these things, or you aren't, and you rather just identify that from the get-go, because there's no point in trying to fight an uphill battle? Like, what are your thoughts on converting an owner from, hey, like, this is the couch that I've had for 20 years and I love it, to like, yes, but now it's a business and you need to invest in your unit? Like, have you been successful at making that transition?
Yeah, I think there's a few that I'd say we've at least made some progress on. Um, the one I'm thinking of, the 20-year-old couch guy, he was an investor, so he owned multiple units, and he just didn't have any interest in updating. They were just strictly like, rented into the ground. I don't want to put any money into this type of thing. And
Hmm.
of course, those were our biggest headache units. And so the best way that we've been able to make progress with that is just showing the guest feedback. We actually this exact unit that I'm talking about, we got a 5-star review, but in the review, it says the owner should be ashamed of this property. It's like, I've never stayed in something so disgusting. I'm only giving it 5 stars because Steven and his team were so receptive to our feedback. Like, we bent over backwards to take care of him, but at the end of the day, he kind of understood that, hey, sorry, we can't update this floor that had, this carpet's been 20 years old, the couch is 30 years old, whatever. And so when the owner saw that, he was like, well, maybe we'll look into making some updates this offseason. You know what I mean? So I think the best way to do it is kind of twofold. It's one, to show them the data of, in our market in particular, the difference. We do a lot of oceanfront condos. So I could have condo A directly next door to condo B, and condo A could be updated, condo B not updated. The difference in revenue could be 2 to 3 times in condo A versus what it is in condo B, just because our market is so saturated. And so if I can show an owner that says like, hey, if you put this money in, like, your revenue, this will pay for itself. Oh, excuse me, over the next year. That's been one way that's been successful. And then the other is just showing them the feedback from guests and saying, like, if we keep getting these negative reviews on your unit, it the revenue is going to go to zero because it's so competitive too. So just
Hmm.
making sure that the owner understands that there is return on investment there, and the revenue will come with time. That's been our biggest key to success, converting a few of the holdout owners who are just not interested in spending money in their unit.
No, that's a great point right there. Like just showing them that it's not like something you're inventing. It's not coming from you. Look at what your guests are saying. That's a that's a good one. And just going back to the story of how you got started. You first bought your own units, and that's how you got into this. So I wanna understand a couple of things, because you then paused completely your personal investments to focus on scaling the operation. But you mentioned that you've learned so much through doing this that if and when you go back into becoming an investor and buying again, you would have a completely different perspective, perhaps from when you first started acquiring property. So how has your view on what's a good vacation rental investment evolved from seeing so many properties be added in your management portfolio?
Yeah, so, we bought our first one. I say we, my wife and I, back in it would have been, November of 2020. So about a little over 4 or almost 4 years ago now. And it was I got, stationed in South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, which is about 2.5 hours from Myrtle Beach.
Hmm.
I had been wanting to get into real estate for a while. I was having a difficult time convincing the wife that, "Hey, this is a good long-term wealth builder." It's if people are risk averse, real estate does not sound super appealing to them. But I was like, hey, like we're within a drive of the beach. We could just purchase this. Worst case, our incomes can cover the mortgage. This is back when rates were 2 or 3%, some crazy stuff. So,
Hmm.
um, I kind of convinced her. I was like, hey, we can buy this. We've got a place to go on weekends. Is worst case, best case that we make a decent amount of money, just rent it out through Airbnb. And to be honest, timing, I was just dumb luck on my perspective, right? There was very like I knew I wanted to get into real estate, but I really didn't run many numbers. It was just like, this is a nice spot. I can see us using it. Hopefully the income kind of helps offset expenses, and that was that. And then after our first year, it was probably similar to a lot of people back in that time frame because interest rates were so low and that type of thing. But we made a pretty good amount of money on it based on what we spent on it. And I was like, there might be something here. And so once she kind of saw the numbers on how we did on it, she was a lot more open to continuing the investment. And so we purchased a couple more in the North Myrtle Beach or Myrtle Beach area as well, and just kind of continued to do that up until 2023. So about last year was our the last one that we bought. Um, and really our market is shifted in the fact that because of insurance rates and the mortgage rates too, the numbers almost just don't make any sense anymore, which is probably what a lot of people are saying, and which is why I just stopped putting the money into the real estate side. I
Hmm.
think real estate is a great investment, and I'll continue to buy those over the course of my life. Like I have no intention to stop investing in real estate. I just thought that um, I think business, in my opinion, is a much quicker way to build wealth and build people hype up the passive income dream, which take that for what it is, but I think it's very difficult to make real estate the passive income way that you retire. I think you really need to figure out some sort of more hands-on stream of income that you have more control over, which is why I kind of got in the property management side of the business. Certainly never dreamed of being a property manager or anything, but I just being able to use real estate as an investment vehicle, offset taxes for my wife's W-2 income, and just the other things that come with the freedom of kind of running your own business is the reason that I kind of hopped into it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And with the thought of numbers not working necessarily because of interest rates and insurance costs and whatnot, what do you do as a manager? Because you can let's say accept owners in your management program that bought at a peak with expectations that maybe were real back then, but perhaps not real anymore. Is it a matter of like, okay, I can only accept homeowners that bought long enough where it wasn't a peak and they're not coming in with those high expectations? Is it basically you know like not taking owners that are buying today because they're coming in again with those high costs of ownership and maintaining and insurance? So like we won't be able to provide a return necessarily, or like how do you think that that market dynamic affects your choices of as a manager, as a property manager, of who to bring on or not to bring on as an owner?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it's a tough one, right? It's a tough one because you don't want to turn people away just because you know their numbers or whatever aren't going to make sense. But this is really important during the acquisition phase to let the owners do all the talking and really understand their perspective. And that's been important for me early on. Is just I don't remember who said this. I think I saw it at a Verma, but someone I was like, "How do you choose which owners you take?" And he's like, "As long as I can take them out to brunch, I think we'd be a good fit for each other." So that's kind of like their initial litmus test. And then when it comes to the profitability piece, it's like you really need to understand what their goals are with the unit.
Hmm.
For example, we had a recent guy reach out with a relatively nice unit, and he's with a different company currently, and he was like, saying things like, "This company is losing me money because they're not getting enough revenue." He's like, "We used to be renting for X amount, now we're renting for Y, which is much lower." He's like, "I need someone that's gonna get me more money, this and that." And, like, I could have stepped in and been like, "Oh, yeah, no problem. We can get you this, this, and this." But looking at his unit and his numbers, it's like, actually, you're just getting about market rates, right? Like,
Hmm.
your unit, it's a fine unit, it's nothing special, it's, oceanfront, but at the end of the day, you're getting what a normal average unit should expect based on what you're telling me. So like for me to overpromise something to him, it might be fine earlier on, but if he's guess what's going to happen in a year, he's going to come to me with the exact same problem that he talked to me about earlier is like, "Hey, you're losing money, yada yada yada." So the first step is, hey, just listen to what the owner's saying and make sure you're going to be a good fit and be able to deliver what you're telling them. And then B is just setting expectations appropriately. Like if you're over promising that you're going to get them extra 20, 30, whatever $1,000 on an annual basis, and that's not realistic, it might be fine. You might get another unit up front, but you're really shooting yourself in the foot. And not only will you have an upset owner, but then that negative word of mouth comes in a year later. So it's like, you might be able to lock them down with a good sales pitch, but in a year from now, it's not only going to be a headache of an owner, but they're going to be going to their neighbors and saying this company, overpromised this and really upset. And then you get the negative word of mouth, which is, you know, can't put a price on positive word of mouth, but definitely can't put it on negative word of mouth either. Cause I've seen a lot of, seen a lot of that on our local Facebook groups too. Just people bad mouthing some of the other local companies. And all it takes is you seeing one post from one person, and then that person just writes you off as a company. So we make
Hmm.
sure we're extra careful of setting appropriate expectations up front. And like, if we can't make them money, then I'm just going to tell them like, here's what to expect. Here's the rough numbers. Like, if it's not a good investment, so be it. Not to keep going on tangent, but I talked to some guys who were, um, new and eager Airbnb owners. They had just bought a golf course unit, which in our market, golf course units are doing real bad. Oceanfront units are doing okay, but golf course units are down significantly year over year. And I just was listening to them talk about their numbers and stuff. And I was like, man, these guys should not be buying this. And their expectations, and I didn't say that directly, but I kind of alluded to like, hey, golf course units are struggling, like this and that. And he's like, well, this guy said he could get me this much. And I'm like, okay, like I understand that that's what he told you, and we manage very similar units, and then just in the back of my mind, I was like, these guys are going to have a bad time over the next year just based on how the market's doing. So you got to be really cognizant of that and just make sure that you're not taking on or over promising people, and even in the short term, you might lose an owner, but long term, it's definitely the right move.
The reputation is
Yeah,
worth
I
way
cannot
more
understate
than one
reputation.
owner.
Yeah, 100% right, man. You can like social proof and reputation are the two big things you should focus on. Doesn't happen overnight, but over the course of a couple years, that's when the momentum really starts to build.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. No, that makes a lot of sense. And tell me something. When it comes to you sort of looking ahead at the next coming months, the next coming years, what is it that you see? Like, what's the vision that you have for Myrtle Beach Destinations? Is it continuing to scale? Are there certain bottlenecks that you think you might need to tackle first to ensure you're ready for what's coming ahead? What stage are you in at the moment?
Yeah, man. I tell you, we just hit our like absolute dead season as of November, right? So a lot of empty calendars. We've got essentially 4 months until March 1st when spring break kicks up again. And we've got some major projects we need to tackle. So we're about to bring cleaning in house, which is going to be a major one. Right now it's 100% vendors. So we're going to essentially slowly cut all the vendors out over the next 4 months, build out a cleaning facility, laundry facility, and just do 100% in-house cleaning. So that's for scale. That's something I think that we really need to do. We've lost we don't have enough control over our cleaners. That's like our next big thing that we need to figure out over the next 4 months. And then, the back of my mind is just continuing to scale, but scale appropriately. So as I said, like just really focusing on who we want, just based on the momentum that we've got with our reputation, everything. I think it's safe that we can appropriately add about 5 to 7 units per month, which doesn't sound like a lot, but then you fast forward 6 months from now, and it adds up pretty dang quick, right? So really, like the back napkin goal is about 150 units by March. Realistically, I'd like to be at over 200 units by this time next year, with the end goal in 3 to 5 years being right around the 500 unit mark.
Hmm. No, that's interesting, and I'm intrigued by the fact that you're bringing cleaning in house just now, and yet you've managed to still maintain those review scores we were talking about earlier, despite outsourcing. So let's start with how have you managed to deal with an outsourced cleaning team to make sure they're following your quality standards, and then we'll talk about the transition of bringing that in house.
Yeah. Um, So we've always tried to focus on cleaning teams that are small operators, and we're generally the majority of their business. Like we
Okay.
pretty much are their business, right?
Okay.
And so
Okay.
that's been pretty intentional of us working directly with the owner and knowing them. They may have other people underneath them, but we know that if we give them a call, they're going to answer our phone and like be ready to fix things on a moment's notice. So
Okay.
the first thing would be like almost like a crawl, walk, run, right? So crawl being we're going to give you 1 unit after we meet and do our initial vetting and make sure that they've got high standards. How are we verifying they have high standards? We do 100% inspections prior to guest arrival. So we're always trying to work that feedback loop of how did the cleaners do? Like, what did our inspectors catch? And then pass any feedback from either the inspectors or the guests to the cleaners is kind of the goal. So as long as we've got good cleaning teams, like that was kind of our goal from day one is just having a tight knit cleaning team that we know we can rely on. And honestly, we've shot ourselves in the like everyone has issues with their cleaners, but there was a group that we gave probably way too many units to up front. Like they weren't ready to scale with us, and so we got them up to earlier on like 30 or 40 units, and then we started seeing a bunch of holes in their processes. So we kind of had to walk it back and then start outsourcing to another cleaning team. And so it's just kind of been a small process of, build trust with cleaning team A. Once they get to a certain capacity, then cleaning team B, and then kind of, slow process from there.
And what was the logic behind this being the right time for you to bring it in house, and why that made sense, financially and strategically?
Yeah, we're also dealing with just like a lot of headaches of, our generally our cleaners are good. We do have a few issues that we're still dealing with some of them. And a lot of the issues that we're running into just like unresponsiveness. We had one cleaning team just not show up, like 2 times in the past month. So then we've got to pull in another cleaning team. We really need a lot more control over the process. And then also um refunds from guests. Like if guests are demanding that there was a cleanliness issue, we really don't have a lot of power to hold the cleaners accountable. And so we essentially oftentimes are eating the difference of that fee. And so we've just kind of gotten to the point where due to lack of control in the processes with our cleaners that we need to bring it in house. Plus the rates that they're charging are just they're pretty high, like 30 to 40% on average higher than what our market is, in my opinion. And so we just need to I think it'll be a pretty big profit margin if we do it right to bring it, excuse me, internally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
That
to answer
makes
your
sense.
question, why? I mean, there was really the lack of controls, but the stars just kind of aligned with we were running into all these issues as we're moving in the off season. And so
Hmm.
our options are do it now or wait a whole nother year because there's no way we're going to do it in the middle of peak season. Right. So it's like really just everyone I talked to at Verma last month too was like, my one regret is I didn't take cleaning in-house sooner, and so I
Mm.
was like, "Well, I guess," and everyone was kinda throwing around the 60 to 80 property mark. They wish they brought cleaning in-house, which we're past that now, but being in off season, I think we're still in the spot where we can not smoothly, but, relatively smoothly as far as, getting things off the ground. Now is the time to do it versus wait another year when we've got 200 units.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, and this is a perfect example of planning ahead of time in terms of like what do you need to put in place today that's going to come handy 6 months, a year from now. What else would you say you are either thinking about developing or thinking about working on or have started working on that is not a need today but will be a need when you double the size of your portfolio?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're my kind of three major things that I'm looking to build out in the off season are a better maintenance program, the cleaning in house, and then inspector program. Or our inspector program's got in house. We technically they're 1099s, but what we're going to do is going to take a knee in the off season and just look at our processes and procedures for those three core elements, which in my opinion are a vast majority of keeping guests happy. And then we're going to essentially put the processes and procedures in place now. That way, when we hit March with 150 units, it's a very smooth transition into that. We brought our maintenance guy in house for the first time in this summer, and it was fine. It was good to have like that control, but really, I think we skipped a few steps, and now we're kind of taking a step back and figuring out like what pieces of the puzzle do we need to put in place now for inspectors, maintenance, and cleaners? That way, in March, it's going to be very smooth because our market occupancy right now is probably like 15% tops, and it'll be like that for the next 4 months. So it's a really good opportunity to just build out, ahead of time.
Interesting. And any examples like on the maintenance side of things? I mean, you talked about some examples earlier when it comes to the cleaning component, but like let's say maintenance wise or inspection in terms of inspections. You said when you brought maintenance in house, you skipped a few steps. What are those steps that other people shouldn't miss if they're also bringing maintenance in house?
Yeah, I think what we missed was like a clear procedure for creating maintenance tickets that started with, guest or inspector reports an issue and then working through to issue is resolved and it's been able to be passed to the owner for like a coherent understanding of what happened in the property. And so when we brought maintenance in house, I think we did relatively well to deploy our maintenance guy and fix things, but there were a lot of documentation issues as far as like what he did at properties or um, you know, what he was tasked to do and us maybe not being able like we know we needed to send him there and that he fixed stuff, but us articulating it to owners as to why we charge them, $65 to do a X, Y, and Z, that piece was missed. And it's, you never want to feel like you're nickel and diming your owners. And so if you can't really articulate and show them with pictures and a description exactly what happened during that time, it can cause relationship issues with your owners. And so there were a lot of things that I waived, even though they were 100% valid charges. Like I ate the cost just to
Mm.
keep that relationship up with our owner, knowing that it's really our fault for not having a better procedure established to show them, hey, we entered the unit due to a clogged toilet. He unclogged the toilet. Guest was happy. You know, here's the date it happened on, and here's why you're being charged this much. So that was what we really needed to do. Whereas, like, there were a lot of times that was missed, and it would just show up as a $65 maintenance charge, and owners would be like, well, "What am I looking at here?" So,
Mm.
um, and this goes to my point of like, yeah, a lot of industry people that have been here for a while have probably already figured these things out. And these are the things that we knew that bringing in all dudes with no industry experience, these are kind of be some of the growing pains. Is a lot of these solutions are there
Mhm.
and can be found out by networking or at Verma or whatever it may be. But it's good to just talk about it, figure out what other people are doing that works for them, and then just kind of put it in place and tweak it as needed based on your company needs.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this is that, to your point, the solutions are out there. And so if we look at something like maintenance, there's task management platforms like Breezeway, and there's others
Yep.
too, right? And then it's like, okay, well, one thing is having the tool, another thing is using it and making sure the team actually leverages it. And so people get, you know, caught into thinking that, okay, I have the tool now, it solved the problem. Where well, is your team even using it? You know, is
Dude,
really
yeah.
the challenge.
That that almost feels like a personal attack because we that's 100% what we did. It's like we had the tools, we had Breezeway, that type of stuff. And it was like, all right, go do. And it was like, I'll take full responsibility for not being more clear if to like, here's how we do with Breezeway. And so it's really important that, the tools sound great, but unless you really know how you're going to roll them out, it just becomes more of a headache than it's worth. So that's 100% what we did. And that was some of the errors that we had is like, you listen to the salesman for whoever it may be, and then you just where it falls flat is the implementation piece. So if I had like one takeaway for people rolling out new software or a new tool in their business is I would spend an almost annoying amount of time up front making sure everyone understands how to use it and that it's rolled out probably in a week or two longer than you think people need training on just to make sure it becomes a solidified habit because we spent a week or so on stuff and then we're like all right everyone do it and then like a couple weeks later we realized all right literally no one is using this and so we cut out tools because of that and that's part of the uh, processes we're building out this off season is just really like refining the training piece of here's the tools we need and here's how we're going to put those processes in place.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Now, in terms of some of the elements that you feel like you have started to spend more time on as the team has grown and the operation has grown, how would you say your time has shifted from back when you were having to deal with everything to now? Like, what do you consider to be an important good use of your time today versus the way you looked at it before?
Yeah, everything that I do now is in pretty much this has been the goal of starting the business is just something that is related to company growth. Like if I'm having to do stuff in the day to day, interacting with guests, anything like that, I think that's just uh, it's not a good use of my time, and that was kind of the goal from day one is putting people in place that can do that stuff, so I can, almost to a fault, hyper focus on like company growth side of the house. Whereas like if there's a task that I know probably needs done, I will procrastinate that on that for months, and then just use it as an excuse to like focus on company growth stuff. But yeah, so for me, like the marketing and just general outreach of the business, getting people to know that we exist, figuring out ways to get our name in front of more people on different platforms. So like rolling out on new OTAs. Like we're currently onboarding with Marriott right now, which I'm pretty excited about. Stuff like that that essentially expands the reach of the business is where I try to put my time and effort onto. So that is in regards to guest and then owner marketing as well. So, we just recently hired a business development guy. So that's been going okay, pretty well actually up to this point. He started about a month and a half, 2 months ago. And I say hire, he's technically a 1099 contractor that does this, but since we brought him on board, I think he's closed 8 or 9 in the past month or 2, so it's been pretty
Hmm.
successful. So, like, really what I try to do is figure out ways that I can grow the company based on my current talents, and then if I can find someone to replace me doing what I was doing to help company growth, that's kinda what I've been slowly doing up to this point. So
Hmm.
start with the day-to-day operations, like, okay, teach someone to do this, and then, move into owner acquisition, teach someone to do this, and it's just gonna be my goal is to make it a process of just, figuring out putting people in places to help them being the ones to grow the company where I can just kinda take a seat and look at KPIs and let the thing kinda run itself without me getting in the way.
No, that's interesting, and it's where a lot of people get caught up when scaling, when they're not sort of aware of the importance of delegation and whatnot. And sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's just being thinking that no one can do this better than I can, type of thing. So it's important. I hear this often and often, time and time again, when it comes to like going from being an employee in your business to being a business owner and making that transition, right? Which is not always easy. Now, going back to tools, right, and tech stacks. I mean, you have a pretty comprehensive tech stack. Most operators nowadays do as well, with many pieces from PMS to pricing to all sorts of things, market data, guest experience portals. My question to you is, what have you not found a solution for from a tech stack perspective? And if nothing comes to mind right away, you can think about this
Mm.
for a few minutes. But I'm just curious to know, what is a solution? What is a problem that you have that there has not been a software vendor or provider that has been able to solve for?
That's a good question. I think, to be honest, there's so many resources out there that I don't know if I have a great answer to this. I can tell you an internal pain point that we're dealing with right now that there is 100% a solution for is the phone system that we use.
Hmm.
Um, since we started internally, it was always like, you know, um, I wanted the ability to be able to text and call that goes to everyone on our team, like all the operations managers for
Hmm.
guests and owners alike.
Hmm.
Um, and that has grown into when we've got virtual assistants in the Philippines that do our guest messaging. We also want them to be able to receive the text now. So we've been dealing with some issues with some new phone systems that we've tried to roll out where a lot of the phone calls that come in, or all of them for that matter, are still being handled by one of our operations managers that's local, 24/7. And so that's been a headache for us. We've been using Verizon One Talk for that, and that has not been a good solution. It's missed calls. It's just not reliable. And so we've tried to roll out a few others, but I don't know if you know there's been a recent update. I don't know who requires this, but there's a certain compliance that you have to fill out for new phone systems if you're a business, essentially verifying that you're not spam, that you're a real business, right? And that takes weeks. We recently tried to do it back in June, for a new phone system. And just 3 days ago, I got feedback that, hey, we need more information. So that's that's to be able to text with a phone system. So like right now, I'm weeks to months away from being able to roll out a new phone system that also allows the ability for our guests to text the virtual assistants in the Philippines. So that's been a headache that we've been dealing with for a while. That once again, I guarantee there's 100 people in the industry, thousands that have already got their phone system down to a science, but that's just something that we've been having to experiment with for the past really year now.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, there's so many, right? There's so many tools, and they solve one single thing, and so it's navigating through all of that. And I'm always curious to hear what people are missing, or what is left to be built, or what innovation hasn't arrived yet. Any thoughts on I know it's a hot topic, everyone talks about it, but very few people seem to have a practical use case for it, like on using AI within, whether that's listings, guest comms. Like,
Yeah.
have you found any actual use cases?
So we actually rolled out an AI component for guest messaging over the summer. And the intent was that it would auto respond to guests during our after hours. And essentially, really, our goal was to be able to help with lockouts.
Hmm.
And so we rolled that out when we had around 90 some units. And it was a big flop. 0% of the time was it effective for us. And
Hmm.
so it could probably respond to a few basic guest inquiries, but so many of the guest questions were nuanced and it would just throw out a nonsense answer. And we gave it 2 months. You know what I mean? Like, obviously, AI is going to take machine learning. It's going to need time to understand your listings and how you interact with guests and that type of thing. But man, it was not successful for us to the point where I would rather just go hire another virtual assistant for what I was paying, for coverage for almost 90 to 100 units. So we've tried that. Maybe again in a year or two, I'll try if it makes sense. But in the meantime, definitely guest messages. Outside of that, I use Chat GPT to write a bunch of stuff just to at least to start the framework. I do it for a lot of like emails for owners and that type of thing,
Hmm.
potentially for marketing and, um, you know, a variety of stuff to at least build the framework out and then go in and make your own tweaks. So I'd say those have been our two biggest use cases of AI thus far. One successful, one not so successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. And lastly, if we look back, or you look back at your journey from beginning to where you are now, and you were starting all over again, right? With what you know today, what would you do differently? What would you maybe not do? What would you double down on? Like, what would you tell yourself, when you were first starting this journey?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I think if you asked me this like 50 units ago, I would have been like, "Don't do it. It's not worth it." But
Really?
it's just very, it's a natural headache in the business. I'd say um for where I'm at right now, go almost 2 years from when I started, I think the biggest piece of advice I give is just patience. I think that so many people really just want to get their business massive and scaled overnight when in reality, it just, that is not how this business works at all. Like it takes, even for a single property, almost a year to really build revenue and reviews and that type of thing. So build with the end in mind, kind of set your goals up front and know where you want to go. And just have the patience knowing that if you're doing the things right, if you're treating your guests right, if you're treating your owners right, and just, um, putting everything into making sure that people are really happy with your services, the rest is going to come with time.
I love it. Patience. Yeah. I love there's another saying, it also doesn't come from me, but it's basically macro patience, micro speed, right? So macro things take time, but day to day you have to get things done, right? Because day to day, if you
Yeah,
just
that's a
think,
good one.
oh, I
Mm.
have all the time in the world, then you do nothing, right? But no, you have to do a lot day to day, but recognizing that it's going to take a while for the results to show off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good one too. I've never heard that before, but it's a great summary of this industry in particular. Anyway, you can, especially in this industry where everyone can leave you a review, it can be really easy to get sucked into the day to day and kind of miss the bigger picture. But if 95% of your guests are really enjoying themselves and the owners are happy, like things are just they're gonna play out how you want them to over the course of a year or two. You just gotta keep doing the things right.
And then last comment on this point about patience. Another definition I've heard about patience that I've liked is patience is just doing something else in the meantime. Right? Because patience can sound like, okay, how do you become more patient? Well, just get busy, doing
It's
something
true.
else.
Yeah, it's a really good point. You just keep working on smaller things here and there, and then you look up 2 years later and you're like, oh man, like a lot has happened in the past 2 years and it's kind of flown by. So I mean, I think that's a really good point. But yeah, do the things right, just make sure you can stand behind your work and the rest it will come and fall into place over time.
And Stephen, in terms of your ability to navigate the difficulties of the growing pains of growing fast. I mean, you just mentioned, like, maybe if I had asked you this 50 properties ago, your advice would have been, well, don't start it. Of course, it's a joke, but like there's some truth to it in terms of, like, maybe you were going through a lot of challenges, like most operators do. What have you found, other than, of course, I mean, patience is what you're aiming for, but to actually navigate those different difficult situations, like for you, um is it, is there something like sports or books or whatever that might be, meditation, like, I don't know, like, have you found something for you that works in terms of, like, navigating those difficult times?
Yeah, I think for me, um, it's really easy to get sucked into like certain interactions and just think, wow, this business is terrible or I'm doing terrible. And I try to zoom out and just realize that in 5 years, like, no, what we're not that it won't matter, but we're going to forget everything that's happening. So, like,
Hmm.
it, a lot of these interactions, they actually won't matter. Like, almost nothing matters, right? As long as you're
Hmm.
just doing the things right and consistently, like that's kind of what has been my ability is remembering that we're all just on some random rock in the middle of the universe, knowing that like one negative interaction with a guest, one negative interaction with an owner, not fun to deal with, but in a year from now, 2 years from now, I will have completely forgotten it ever happened, and, so will the owner and the guests and all that stuff. So I try to zoom out and just look at the bigger perspective of life, knowing where we wanna take the business. My ultimate goal is just really time freedom in general, and knowing that the only real way to get there is there's going to be headaches and stress and things that suck along the way, and just understanding that, hey, that's part of the business. Like every entrepreneur or really everyone in general deals with that ever. So it's like, I'm not special. You just kind of got to suck it up and deal with it. In a few days, I guarantee you forget about it.
Yeah, stoicism, basically. Having
Yeah,
that
100%.
perspective
Yeah.
of like we're all gonna die and it doesn't matter in the long run, pretty
Yeah,
much.
for lack of a better way to explain that, that at least helps put things into perspective for me of like, might as well just do it and figure it out, and things will fall into place.
I love it. I love it. No, that's certainly helpful. Listen, Stephen, I could keep you here for hours. Believe me, I could. But it has been great. It has been very insightful. Thank you so much for your time and your generosity as well with your insights. Where can people learn more about Myrtle Beach destinations or connect with you?
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. I'm on LinkedIn, or go check out our website. There's our about us section and all that fun stuff. But yeah, go connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with everyone in the industry and kind of share insights where we can. I think that's one of the beauties of this industry is a lot of people are not necessarily completely competing with each other, right? But they've got all the lessons learned that they can share for someone, and it helps them out, and they don't need anything in return for it. It's like, hey, I've been there, done that. This is what worked for me. And 90% of the time, it's a good solution for someone else.
Yeah, no, it's so true that it's something unique about this industry. How generous people are in general about just sharing. Whereas there's industries where it's like, no, this is my secret sauce, and
Yeah.
like I'm not gonna tell you how I've done it. So no, thank you so much for that. I'm sure that people will have gotten a couple of golden nuggets and insights out of this one. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. Talk to you soon.
Yeah. Appreciate it, man.